Now, Thomas is a wonderful fellow, a great friend, guaranteed to stimulate conversation, discussion, and curiosity. A man with many talents, an absolutely stunning artist. And I always admire people that have artistic skills, because basically I have none. And if you haven't checked out Thomas's artwork, and I think it's thomassheridanarts.com, some stunning work there. And of course, that's also a way in which you can support Thomas. And the author of some absolutely outstanding and seminal books. And many people will know that, of course, Thomas has done some tremendous work in terms of exposing the role of psychopaths in society, and also in a counseling role as well, helping people who have found themselves in relationships that are effectively abusive and dealing with psychopaths. So a man of many talents, and it is my great pleasure to welcome to AV8 Thomas Sheridan.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, I got off easy this year. I feel like I'm in the mafia or something back here. It's great. It's been fantastic this weekend, hasn't it? I think just amazing, just amazing. Well, I'm usually more kind of a bit more relaxed, you know, and a bit more like comedic or satirical when I do presentations, because often the stuff that I do, it's quite dark. So that's a good way of offsetting it. But something happened this year that's affected me quite profoundly. And it's almost like I haven't been able to shake it off. Now, before I get to that, I was thinking that we hear people talking about, you know, what would cause the Great Awakening or something, or what would change a shift in consciousness. And I've actually figured out when it happened. People would think, oh, it's going to be a solar cycle, it's going to be the Mayan calendar, it's going to be the return of Planet X. I think I figured it out was when Bernard Manning died. Reality changed. It did, and I'm going to prove it. I am an enormous fan of Bernard Manning, and I had no problem with his politically incorrect jokes. I used to laugh at all his Irish jokes because there was no malice in them. That's the difference. If anyone has worked in a big kitchen in a restaurant or in a factory or in a building site knows that the people of different groups always take the piss out of one another. But if someone tried to pick on one of the gang, all the ones would band together to protect them. And that is real diversity. That's real multiculturalism, not this fakeness. And I know it sounds funny, but it was almost like he was almost like a buffer against this rampant political correctness. He was so fast and quick at telling jokes, and he didn't care who he offended. I remember like one time when the Queen Mother died, he nearly caused a riot. I think it was on Channel 4, and a reporter stuck a camera in his face and said to him, "What do you think of the death of the Queen Mother?" Big mistake. He turns around and says, "Now the corgis can't be blamed for pissing on the sofa." But he had not rehearsed it, because I saw him. He just put his head up and said that. And that's almost like shamanic or something, to have that ability to draw that out. So since he died, and I've been a huge fan, since he died, it's like all this everyone's offended. You know, you notice that? Everyone's offended now. And this ties in with Graham's transhumanism thing. I'm now, you know, a trans Flora Daisy lesbian, right? You're offending me. And they're humanizing. I don't care what you think you are, what you do in your underpants. Your private life is your own business once it doesn't involve children or forced on someone. Other than that, what people do in the privacy of their own home, good luck to them, okay? But they're breaking down into these sort of like pathological archetypes that they're giving people an identity that's not who they really are. And this is all part of demolishing the human identity. That's really what that's about. Demolishing the idea of, I'm a human on this planet, and it's that shape, and That was kismet, wasn't it? But yes, now, could I have the first slide, please? Do I have a laser? Yeah. Now, you see this place here, this piece of this yard here? It's about 3 times the size of this platform. So it would go out to about the table out there. This here. Underneath that is 800 children. There's 800 children between the ages of newborn infants and 6 years old buried in that. That's in a town called Tuam in County Galway, in the west coast of Ireland. And let me tell you the story of why that mass grave exists. In the 1920s, after Ireland won the War of Independence, well, it was a treaty. It was kind of like, it wasn't a full victory. But the country was destroyed. The infrastructure was wrecked, the railways, the bridges, everything was smashed. And a new country starting off from scratch, it'll happen just like in Syria, what Patrick was talking about. It has to be rebuilt again, and there was limited money. It was coming up to the Great Depression. It was after World War I. And so the Catholic Church in Ireland said to the government, well, here's an idea. We will run all the social services, the education system, and the hospitals. And you guys, the government, can just divert what money you have to fixing the railways and the roads and the bridges and all that were destroyed in the war. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. A situation arose where, in rural Ireland in particular, almost exclusively actually, if a girl got pregnant, if she was Catholic and got pregnant out of wedlock, it was considered an extremely shameful thing. You see, this is why I don't do morality. Morality is not the same thing as human decency. Those guys that Patrick showed that were those Islamic fanatics with the dead eyes, they have religious morality, but that's not the same thing as human decency. And this is the difference between human decency and morality. Now, these women were sent to these mother and child homes, they were called, and they're run by the Bon Secure nuns religious order. Very, very, very powerful in healthcare provision, even to this day, all over the world. There are Bon Secure hospitals run by the nuns. The women went there, the baby was born, the baby was taken off the woman as soon as she gave birth. Now, this is not the same thing as the Magdalene laundries. That was another thing altogether. This is how bad it was. This is a separate issue. And the Magdalene laundries were girls who were considered easy or, promiscuous were made to wash out their sins for the rest of their lives in laundries run by the Catholic Church, another religious order, under the nuns. And a lot of them died in there, lived their whole lives. And it was a commercial operation because those convents that had all the big laundries won the contracts for things like the police barracks and the army barracks and the hotels and everything. But they were undercutting businesses because they weren't paying their staff, who were basically white slaves. Now, at Tuam, it's a different case. The baby was snatched off the mother immediately, and the idea was that the baby would be giving up to an adoption, either to an Irish family or an English family, a Catholic family in England or Scotland or whatever. And so that was sad enough. That's traumatic enough because any woman's given birth, when a baby's taken off them, there's all kinds of hormonal. The baby has to be there. That's why women have traumatic experiences if they miscarriage and so on. So the babies were taken and they were raised by the nuns. And you know the way. Now, if you're a Catholic, I'm not putting down your religion. I'm going to talk about how these psychic infections spread. This is what I'm talking about. I'm not putting down people who go to Mass on Sunday or any kind of Christian or anyone like that, if they're a decent person. The babies would divide. You know the way you hear about the Nazi death camps where they would take some that could work and put them to one side and others went to the gas chamber? Well, this is a Catholic order. They would keep the kids that were the prettiest after a certain age. especially like cute little Irish girls, little colleens, and they would sell them for big money on the Irish-American adoption market, and the nuns would pocket the money. Illegally, it was illegal at the time. The other kids who couldn't get adopted were neglected. And many of them died of things ranging from septicemia, from not having their nappies changed, by the nuns, to starvation, to, we'll probably find out one day, they were beaten to death. Now, then they were dumped in a septic tank at the back of the mother and baby home, the septic system. It was an old septic system that belonged to a previous building that was on the site. Now, and there's other implications of that as well, but I won't go completely onto it. But these babies, these kids who were thrown in there, were only discovered, and it's like something out of a horror story. The nuns who got rich off selling the cute and pretty kids didn't tell anyone about this. They kept it quiet. Nuns, you know, married to Jesus, that guy, and morality, and I was going to say, it's just very upsetting because I was down there. The children were dumped in there and forgotten. They were wrapped up in a pillowcase and just dumped. They were dead, right? They died. And in the 1960s, they built a council estate, you know, council housing around it, like you have here. We have them in Ireland too. And children, you know, when you were a little kid, you would dig holes in the garden to play with your soldiers or bury your pets. They were digging up human skulls of babies. And kids were running around the neighborhoods with babies, little children's skulls on sticks. And the council came down, the police came down, told them to all shut up, don't ever dig a garden ever again, and buried, and that was the end of it. There was a very amazing woman down there who was a local historian. And this is another thing, not a mainstream historian, just someone who was a local amateur historian, had figured out there was about 790 odd kids who were unaccounted for. She had gone through all the certificates and everything. They were unaccounted, there was no death certificate, couldn't find them. And she said that they were in there. They were in there, and the council built a housing estate on top of it, knowing it was there. And then this all broke out about 2012. It became a minor scandal at the time, and they still haven't dug this thing up properly. They showed on the news guys with, you know, those like kind of digital scanners, the geophys scanners, but that's not the same thing as getting a shovel and getting in there, because then you could actually find out who these kids were, get the death and wreck, all this kind of other stuff, and find the full age group, and then confirm them. It still looks like that now. So, and then a few months early this year, I know I take the piss a lot and I have a laugh a lot. That's part of a kind of a therapy thing for me because of the crap I have to deal with. But I went down there. I had to see it. I'm not interested in all this internet research. That's okay. It's like Patrick went to Syria. You have to go. You have to get your hands dirty. Okay, because that's one of the traps that we sit there saying, oh, alternative, you know, mainstream journalists, they're not journalists anymore, they don't investigate. Well, there's far too many people in this scene that just watch videos. That's just as bad, you know. So if you don't know, don't say anything, or just to talk about it, but don't think you have all the facts. And so I went down there, and I made a film called My Heart to Rome, My Carcass to Ireland. And it's on YouTube, you can see it. But the day I got down there, it was a miserable rainy day. It's in the most kind of run-down, depressing 60s housing scheme. Classic, you know, socialist brutalism architecture, badly built concrete houses. And it's in the middle of the children's playground. And not only that, the children in that, now when you want to talk about a psychic attack, it's in a square, and in the square, is that thing with 800 children, right? Next door to that, where the kids play football, is a mass grave of 8,000 people who died in the famine. And then there's a wall preserved from a building that was there of people who were executed by a firing squad. And the wall is there saying in memory of the people who were executed by firing squads during the War of Independence. And right in the middle of it is a kiddies' playground with all the swings and everything. Now, you think that doesn't reach into the psychic condition, the consciousness of the children of the community? Absolutely it does, absolutely. And so I went down there, and there was the mainstream media were there the same day I got there. It was two lads from the Irish Examiner newspaper. It'd be kind of like the Irish version of the Telegraph. And these were hard-nosed, reporters. These were hard-nosed fellows who show up with car crashes where there's multiple victims, murders, gangland hits and everything. And one of them was crying. One of them was crying. And they actually filmed and interviewed me there. And amazingly, he recognized me. And I said, I know you, your man, Thomas Sheridan. And they gave me a little feature in the Irish Examiner. And the guy had tears in his eyes. And they just had a little thing. And I just said I was just down. I didn't want to talk about anything or try to seem like I was capitalizing on it. I just said I had to just see it for myself. Now, the energy in that place is it's like hell. You cannot imagine how toxic the atmosphere is of where the children play, right? Now, I'm not Mr. Oh, for the children and all this stuff. That's not my style. But it was absolutely toxic. And people are living in it, children are playing in it, right? They still haven't dug it up, okay. And it turns out then there was about 12 of these facilities around the country. They were illegally adopting and neglecting kids on an industrial scale between 1928 and 1960. The Irish government were trying to shut them down as early as the 1930s, and the Vatican was interfering, telling them to mind their own business, because the Vatican was ostensibly running Ireland until about the 1980s. And then the EU took over. The bishops had tremendous power. They're tremendous. Those people who would talk about Ireland being a papist state, and that was absolutely true. That was completely true. Now, and then I spent the day walking around Tuam literally in a daze, and I just started walking. And what I noticed to the people was there's a kind of the whole town. Now, I don't mean to, if anyone from Tuam is watching this, I'm not saying there's something wrong with you, or that you're messed up or something. It's not your fault. But people walk you see lots of people with limps. When you go to really bad, council estates, and people don't look healthy, they have this kind of kinetic energy, and I grew up in one of these places, so I know what they're like. I'm not talking as a social anthropologist. I grew up in one of these places. And there's the whole town seemed to be filled with people like that, as if this was almost like the opposite of a ley line, an evil line or something, that had actually created this horror in the community and affected people on some kind of energetic level. And so I walk over to the cathedral, and I'm not a Christian at all. Again, I say, if you're a Christian, keep it to yourself. If you're a Muslim, don't try to convert me, because then we have a huge problem. And I don't try to convert you. This is the problem I have with Christianity. Now, a lot of people say I have a problem with Christianity. It's not the average Christian. It's the evangelical nature. Only Christianity and Islam are the only evangelical religions that believe they can force you or convert you. And that's the problem I have. Apart from that, I don't care. It's your own business. On the cathedral, I look up above the door of the entrance of the cathedral, and I see this bloody thing. And that's what some of the people were walking around looking like that. And there was two of them above the main door. And this cathedral wasn't built in the Middle Ages. It was built about 1890 or something. So it's not something from the time of, the Black Death. Now, I started, what is this? What are these gargoyles, these weird things they put on these big cathedrals? Now, the official story is they're water spouts, which a lot of them are to channel water off the roof. But they're also, in a spiritual sense, to distract evil from the cathedral. That's the prevailing thing. But also, there's and this is absolutely true. If you look into canon law, the reason why priests have a boy at the front waving incense like this, a little altar boy, is because they believe the demon wants the priest, so they sacrifice the altar boy instead. He's like the old story of the woman who in China who has to walk in front of her husband when there's a landmines there. That old like stereotype. I know it's not true, but it was a famous old horrible stereotype. Well, they literally were doing it with children in the spiritual sense. Now, you can believe, I don't know if this stuff is, well, I do know this stuff is true, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but if you don't believe it's true, what does it tell you? That the child is disposable, you know what I mean? Even if it's all, you're a complete atheist. Then you see where well, I can have sex with them now, because they're nothing, right? They're nothing. You've dehumanized them. And you've been dehumanized. You're not the bishop, you're not the pope, you're not the cardinals, you're not even a priest, you're not even a nun who's married to God, throwing a baby into a septic tank, right? You're nothing. You're nothing. And that's a cascade effect that comes out this kind of Abrahamic theocracy that you have in the Old Testament that started with this psychopathic entity called Jehovah telling Abraham to test his son, and then at the last minute said, I was only joking. Now that's gaslighting. And the Bible, the Old Testament is full of that. It's full of that. Job and this kind of thing. The God testing Job's fate, and then he wiping his jealous entity, whatever it is. And this cascades down. I know there's the New Testament and all. I get all that. I understand all that. But this psychic infection runs deep. It runs deep. And when Patrick showed those photographs, that intergenerational family of fanatics, did you notice their eyes? Did anyone notice their eyes? They were dead. Do you remember the teenage boy, the grandson at the back? The eyes were dead. That is soul loss. That in many indigenous cultures is a symbol of soul loss. You see it in cult members. Anyone who joins a cult and ends up being completely controlled by the cult has those eyes, because the soul has temporarily left and it's been replaced by a kind of what the Greeks call a daemon, but a pathological daemon. It's almost like a consciousness parasite that jumps in and operates the person like a mannequin or an automaton. And that way they are absolved from killing, because in their own minds, because they didn't do it, something else did. And you know who else has dead eyes? Psychopaths like Tony Blair. Have you ever noticed that? Dead. Dead. Now, I've always found from day one that the best way to deal with them is comedy and satire and humor, because they don't get it. They don't get the subtle nuances of absurdist satire. They don't understand the idea that a metaphor can carry a story for something else, especially if it's in a joke. You know, like what I just told you at the beginning. And this is always how you can tell a cult member, always how you can tell a fanatic, always how you can tell a psychopath. Now, I'm not saying the cult members are psychopaths. They emulate the psychopaths who run the cult, because it becomes a hive mind kind of idea, right? And back in the late 80s, I became very interested in a group called the Discordian movement. And the Discordian movement, where basically they believed that wherever orthodoxy is entrenched, conservatism, you know, accepted modality, it automatically leads to pathological behavior. If you have a systematic society, it eventually becomes boring, and then that transfers into wars, Romans sacrificing things to the Colosseum, and pathological behavior among the elite. And their idea was to cause chaos. And by causing systems of chaos, it would throw the orthodoxy off kilter enough to disrupt it in its processing. You know, it might save your life, you know, that kind of thing. It might buy you time. And this also, they believe it, and I firmly in my heart believe this as well, it generates creative thinking. Because what it does is, if you disrupt the orthodoxy by causing chaos either through satire. That's why the jester always lives while the rest, the king and queen, the rest of them are all dead. He's the only one in the court that dies of old age. You disrupt them, you break off their trajectory of pathology and destruction or wherever they're up to, criminality, and it buys someone time to find a potential solution in order to maybe take them down. You got that? But otherwise, if you have a situation in Germany where nobody in the 1930s was challenging the Third Reich leadership and National Socialism, and it happened in the Soviet Union with the Bolsheviks, you see the end results. I've been using a phrase for years now, consciousness insurgency. And this is where creative thinking, taking the piss, and that's why I was half joking about Bernard Manning. When Bernard Manning said that about that, I'm stressing the point now, about the Queen Mother, what did he do? He pulled the throne from underneath them and made them just ordinary slobs like the rest of us. In fact, he equated them to dogs. Now, do you just think about how powerful that is? There's nothing that's more like that. You know, that's why Charlie Chaplin made The Great Dictator. He was desperately trying to stop this kind of totalitarianism, this militarization going on in Europe. But it didn't work, because the film was banned in Germany, of course. But you can see what he was trying to do. And it's worth watching that film, because there's a lot in that. Now, this is an idea called ecstatic gnosis. It comes from the Discordians, from the chaos movement of the 1970s. It came out of things like Michael Moorcock, books like Psychonaut, Philip K. Dick, Robert Anton Wilson. I'm sure you know some of these names. And even things like science fiction. The idea was to disrupt the orthodoxy, to smash it, to cause a problem. So therefore, it couldn't become pathologically entrenched. You know, it couldn't become, and that's why I think comedy on TV is horrible now. Because that used to be very good at that at one time. And that's become a horrible TV show, canned laughter and everything, especially American shows. Dreadful, dreadful. Now these guys, this idea of static gnosis is that you can put yourself into, now the word gnosis is a Greek term, just means knowledge. But it means a sort of an inner knowledge, a self-reflective knowledge that comes from your internal subconscious mind. This is why I'm also very interested in Jungian psychology and mythology, because the truest truths of all are the myths, because they're actually our subconscious mind communicating to us. The subconscious mind of the Catholic Church communicating to us, telling us what they really are. You understand? The subconscious mind never, ever, ever lies. It never lies, ever, because it exists from a time before we had language. And that's why it speaks in symbols and metaphor and dreams. It never lies to you. But it only communicates to someone who's willing to go into gnosis and try to understand it. And that ecstatic gnosis is a similar idea. By causing some kind of disruption, deprivation, you knock yourself out of complacent thinking and you jump into a state very similar to what Tony was saying about the right brain coming in. You know, that could very well be part of it without going into any kind of neurology. The consciousness is not even in the brain. It's just a processing system for this machine. The consciousness operates independently of them. But yeah, Tony's onto something. He's definitely right about that. It does something like that. It disrupts the thing. And then the subconscious mind, or whatever you want to call it, the psyche, is then allowed to talk to you. You know, before you go to sleep, there's a very common thing called exploding brain syndrome. I know it sounds like a John Carpenter movie or something, but what it is some people hear a bang in their head just as they're about to fall asleep. In stage 4 sleep, they will hear boom or a loud buzzing sound, or sometimes even music, right before they fall asleep. And at that point, you will often get the answer to a problem that's bugging you. In fact, many scientists, from Tesla to Watson, in stage 4 sleep, experienced exploding brain syndrome and made discoveries. So the subconscious mind is almost like the steward of you, underneath you. But it has difficulty communicating to us because of this interference that exists in us. Religion is a huge part of that. Organized religion, not spirituality. And these people, these guys, these chaos magicians and these Discordian guys were so far ahead of the game. They were predicting the idea that demons would manifest in the electronic world, in the electronic spectrum. Back in the 80s, they were talking about this. And when they talk about a demon, they don't necessarily mean an actual being as such, but an energy force. You know, an energy force that represents pathology or damaging to humans. Some cultures call them the jinn, the fairies, whatever. They're a kind of a disruptive, a pathological force. And they were even predicting this idea of this thing called, there's a kind of a famous demon called Choronzon. John Dee invoked him, so did Crowley. And they said this demon would come out as Choronzon 333 as a kind of a computer virus. And it would wreak mayhem on the internet for ordinary people. Now, and it would actually spellbind them and take them over. And they were predicting this, now, this before the internet. They were talking in terms of video games, and before the internet was envisioned. But these guys were the real futurists. They were seeing the subconscious future, which will throw you further into the future than the conscious future. And this was also the antidote to transhumanism in many ways. Now, in old ritual this is one of the reasons I study the occult so much, is because these guys are using it against us. They took the folk traditions of our ancestors, weaponized it, and called it marketing, political spin, PR, and advertising, and propaganda. Saul Alinsky wrote an amazing book back in the 50s called Rules for Radicals. It seems very outdated now, but at the time he wrote that book, things like apartheid existed, Catholics couldn't vote in Northern Ireland, women had no real rights in the workplace, and the idea, and black people in America were still subject to things like Jim Crow laws and things like that, and there was still terrible segregation. The idea was that he was using that same idea of disrupting the orthodoxy in order to allow civil rights legislation to come in. The problem is that once that was all solved by the mid-70s, these Marxist college professors decided to invent new problems out of thin air, and that's why we're in the mess today we are. But the book, for its time, it's a fascinating read. Now, in traditional magic, now, please bear with me, okay? They talk to demons, and they get advice from demons. Now, a demon doesn't necessarily mean an evil thing. It just means another form of consciousness that's outside our space-time reality, so you can get information from the future. It's actually a form of time travel. And they would use this. This goes back a very ancient tradition all over all cultures. They had things in London called cunning-men. And cunning-men used to invoke demons to find out where buried treasure was, to find out where horses would run races. And they were amazingly accurate in many cases. And the idea was they would contact an entity, evoke it, praise it. They would call them angels or whatever they would call them. And they would get the information. And then that was that. But the thing was, which was what happened with John Dee and Edward Kelly in the Elizabethan court, you can be very easily spellbound. You can be very easily spellbound because it works once or twice. It gives you a rush of endorphins. It makes you feel good that you're staring at, you're looking for this thing all the time. You're trying to get information. Now, how they used to do it was a thing called a scrying mirror, which is a piece of polished black obsidian. It's a stone. It's like a black mirror, right? And on either side would be a light. And they would stare into it until a face appeared. I've actually done it, and I saw a lion's face as clear as anything, looking right back at me. That was research. Didn't do it again after that. But it showed me whatever. Is my mind creating it? Probably. It's probably my mind creating it. Does it matter? No, because it's absolutely, my initial thing was, I wouldn't mind having a go at that again, to test it. You understand? Like, was I hallucinating? And then I never did it again, of course. This is years ago when I was much younger. Now, what did I say the black obsidian screen looked like, right? It was a black mirror, right? that mesmerizes people and takes them over and has a light on either side. Anyone have any of these in their pocket? The digital gin. Remember 3 years ago I spoke about that? What do they walk around like? Right? Hello, Mr. O'Brien. Your wife over there is lying in the car park. Yeah, sure. Look. That's not normal behavior. I was in a restaurant. I think it was in Oslo or somewhere a few years ago, and there was two couples out having dinner, and they were like this, ordering the food. Spellbound. Spellbound. We're entering into this. Those, you know, those viewing visors you put here? You ever see how cheap they are? They're like a tenner. And all the implications of as Doreen was saying, about locomotory organ dysfunctionality. That's becoming our new God. That. Now, people, is it hopeless? Yeah, it kind of is, because that's not going to go away unless a meteorite hits the earth or something. But you can kill it. You switch the fucking thing off. Anyone who's seen my work on psychopaths, no contact ever again. When this becomes pathological, it's just like if you go and you bet some money on horses and you have a nice time, and then you don't go back. You don't go there all the time. These things are extremely addictive for that reason. And they create chimeras. They create mirages. They create false realities. And the whole thing of the mainstream media, this couldn't have been better for them. You know, couldn't have been better. CNN and the BBC are the demons. 21st Century Newswire is the angels. Look on it that way, right? But that still doesn't mean you always look in these things, you know, because there's always that temptation. And I use these a lot to disrupt and cause chaos. Anyone who's been on my Facebook page, you'll get everything from, you know, very complex things on Hindu mythology, and then the next thing, you know, somebody had, you know, drunken midgets fighting in the street. This is what Facebook doesn't want. They want you taking a photograph of your dinner. They want you taking a photograph of yourself constantly. You're staring. Bullshit, inane bullshit. Disrupted. If you have to stay on it, cause chaos. Cause discordia. Mess it up. But also, use the funny stuff, the satire, the jokes, the drunken midgets, to deliver, like a carrier wave, messages inside that. You know how powerful that is? While your conscious mind is laughing at some funny meme, they give them something else next that might be on anything. That's what the subconscious mind remembers. That's why these memes are very powerful. You know, these memes, that's why you're always laughing and remembering them, because it's your subconscious mind that remembers them more, because they almost mythologize the world we live in. You understand? Like, our ancestors used to deal with problems in society, problems in the world. They used to deal with them by, say, a terrible disaster. They would talk about in metaphor, in mythology. So a big flood would become a tsunami, would be the black pig who charged across the landscape and destroyed everything, and it went back to the sea where it came from. There was a book called Bruno Bettelheim wrote an amazing book in the 70s. Now, he's a bit of a weird character, but the book still stands, just like Alinsky was a weird character. Sometimes you have to sup with the devil to find the full truths. And he wrote a book called The Uses of Enchantment, and he showed that European fairy tales were essentially designed to teach children about the dangers of rapists and pedophiles. Little Red Riding Hood. And the Jack and the Beanstalk is about the warning about psychopath. Jack is a psychopath. He moves into the giant's house. He kind of brown noses the wife, and he's plotting to kill the giant. That's how they used to do it. Now, your subconscious mind speaks in allegory and metaphor. It doesn't speak in literal things. This is another way we can get below them. Psychopaths think these are just real stories. Just like, you know, you tell an absurdist story. I remember years ago on when used we were tearing up Sinn Féin, and I said I had an army of teddy bears that was going to invade Limerick. And we wrote all these scenarios, and the other side would be they were an army of leprechauns. And you could see people occasionally commenting, this makes no sense, these people are weird, what are they up to? But it was like, occasionally people would get it, and they'd say, that's actually, I know what they're doing, they're taking the piss out of Jerry Adams and the rest of them. That kind. I mean, I used to run a Sinn Féin sex chat line. Yeah, I used to run and you would call up and you would say, add another 50p for South Armagh election results, and a girl reading them out slowly. DUP, 21 votes. SDLP, 45 votes. Sinn Féin, get ready, baby, 180 votes. And it took the piss out of them, and it worked beautifully. It worked. And that was at the time the Troubles were still raging. No, it wasn't a knock on my door, I don't know. But they probably thought I was bonkers. You understand? The jester always dies in his bed of old age because they don't know how to handle it. They think it's crazy. They think it's a sign of something else. They're stupid, right? Now, your compassion as a human being being used against you. Activism is fantastic. Wonderful, right? But I can't save a polar bear. I can't save a koala. But I can give money to a homeless person on the street. I can call them, knock on my neighbour's door. And I can give them, do you want something from the shops? Elderly neighbour, a disabled neighbour. Right? I can do that. But I can't take part in some grand global thing to make world peace happen. Because I'm nobody. We're all nobody. I'm not, and we don't have the power that the globalists have. Now, Charles Dickens came up with a fantastic phrase, and this is in Punch magazine, called telescopic philanthropy, right? And what he was trying to say was, while in the East End of London, children were going around barefoot, half naked and starving, Britannia is more worried about what's going on in the colonies. This happened in Ireland. While babies were being thrown in septic tanks, Irish people were worried about Africa. They were told to take care of Africa. Now, there's nothing wrong with either, but the problem is that the globalists have long used this idea to look over there so you don't see the deterioration at the top, at below your feet. Look at the house, the roof. There's a slate missing, and the bleeding foundation's falling apart. You see, that's what they do. They're very, very sneaky. And that's what Dickens, a great, great man, was telling us with telescopic philanthropy. It's all very good and well to take care of these, but it should be the globalists who are doing it, the ones with the money, Britannia, Tony Blair. They should be the ones using their wealth and their power, Bill Gates, to help these people. We at home should be looking after our own first. And when all these children are clothed, fed, and have security in life, then we divert our stuff to there. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people who do that, but please get a perspective. I can't change them. You can change them. It's really that easy, okay? But we've been told from day one, Bob Geldof, give me your fucking money, whatever he said on the television, right? Bob Geldof, give me your money. And all the time that was going on, how many people would have been on the streets of London? We have these marches in Dublin for all these socialists, and it's all this other cause or the other. And they literally step over homeless, 4,000 homeless people in the streets of Dublin, like that. I'm on my way to fight climate change. That's telescopic philanthropy. Their new god is the carbon, the global warming god. And this is what that's all about. This is this idea. It's not that the problem is activism. It's like what Ian does, he's on the ground. He's there. Other people have the financial and the resources. They're not tied down with families. They can go to Africa. Cool, right? But watching a pop concert doesn't solve global issues. It doesn't, and they've made us very foolish. They've made us very foolish. I'm going to admit something here. When we were in school, just about every school when I was growing up in Ireland was run by the Catholic Church. And they used to give us these boxes called Trocare boxes, right? And they were, Trocare in Ireland means charity or something like that in Irish. And it was for raising money for African orphans. Now, these corporate charities, that money all goes to The CEO, the plush office is downstairs. There are a new company car every year. The paid research trips just happen to be in Bali in a 5-star hotel that has a championship golf course. You know that, right? That's really, everyone knows this about corporate charity, right? It was even known back then. It was even known back then. That doesn't mean the people on the street are the problem. It's the bosses. Now, they used to send us out in this. Now, I grew up literally, I grew up in a slum. I mean, I grew up in a really bad area that was like, I used to go to school and people were dying on the ground of drug overdoses. There was a guy shot outside my bedroom window in a gang war. And then there was the IRA on top of that as well. That's why I'm not particularly fond of them either. And there was, I was there shaking a box to raise money for what they used to say the black babies in Africa. Of course those kids in Africa needed help. But I was sitting there in the freezing rain. I had nothing, you know. And so I used to take half the money and feel really guilty about it, to buy stuff for myself, you know. And then I found that every other kid in the school was doing it. And then you sort of like, okay, that's okay. And it was around the same time I broke off from the Catholic Church. I never have been in a church ever since then. I realized in a very early age that it was a foreign religion that didn't do anything for me. And that was that. But it was just a few pence. It was nothing criminal. But the Catholic bishop who ran that organization, the Bishop of Galway, a guy called Eamon Casey, had a girlfriend and a son, and that money was being used to buy him a Mercedes and to pay for their kind of whirlwind lifestyles. The bishop of a large city, a Catholic bishop, had a girlfriend. And yeah, I don't blame the man. I'd rather have him have sex with women than having sex with kids. So it was almost a relief when we found out. But it was almost a relief when we found out. It's like, because every other week it was like, you know, it was like, you know, it was that, do you remember that episode of Father Ted where they were making the over-70s football team? You remember that one? And the guy goes, oh, Father O'Connor, you know, when he was younger, he had a trial with Liverpool. No, Dougal, he was on trial in Liverpool. And that TV show was like an exorcism for the Irish people, because that was like us saying to them, you lost, you're no longer in power. You're no longer in power, and we're going to take the piss out of you. And there's nothing you can do about it. And all those things that happened at the same time that TV show was on the air. People had a consciousness insurgency. Some very clever people in Ireland made that TV show, and it was an enormous success around the world. And the Catholic Church has never recovered since. They weren't beaten by military, they weren't beaten by politics, they weren't beaten by another religion. They were beaten by taking the piss out of them. You tell me how powerful that is. You tell me how powerful that is. Now, I have loads of things I want to talk about. Yes, I came here today with a kind of, you know me, you get a mixed bag off me. And it's funny how half the things I'm talking about are stuff that people on the stage have been talking about. And Graham was talking about cosmism last night, this idea of Russian science and space being a kind of religion. Well, I'm currently researching for a book at the moment on these kinds of things, and I got my hands on a paper from a 1992 conference at Fordham University in the Bronx in New York. The Soviet Union had fell 1990-ish. 1992, within 2 years of the Soviet Union, a whole bunch of American academics went to the Soviet Union with bags of money. Did they buy science research material? No. Political analysis research material? No. They bought the occult literature and the occult studies of all the scientists and the groups and all the supernaturalism that they tell us is bullshit. They went to the Soviet Union and bought it all up and brought it back to Fordham University. And the minutes of the conference is a who's who of the time of American academics, the ones that would laugh at you and say there's no such that you're just a dead robot. This ties in with these weirdos, these transhumanist guys that want to, you know, necromancers who want to take their father's DNA and bring it back to life. You see, they give us, every so often, they betray what they're really like when they say things like that, right? Subconscious speaks. These are spooky, dark magi in many ways. Even though they may be atheists, that's where they've been pathologically brought to that state. And I'm looking over the thing. Fantastic. Oh, this will be great. Great research. Blah, 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 blah. Guess who funded this? Both the conference at Fordham and also the purchase of all the materials in the former Soviet Union. The Soros Foundation. The Soros Foundation paid for it. Why is the Soros Foundation interested in the black magic and the occult and the testing of supernatural and all kinds of other phenomena, like Corellian photography, where the Corellians discovered that you have an aura around your body? When that was leaked out of the Soviet Union in the 70s, it was so fantastic to people in the West that UCLA immediately began a research program to debunk it. And it was suddenly shut down. Why? Because they proved it. They couldn't debunk it. They smash and grab. They want to know these things so they can get your subconscious mind. They've already got this. They're not here yet. And they know that that's the route in there. They know that's the route in there. They finally figured that out. People like Soros and religion doesn't work anymore. It never really did, actually. But they know they're looking back and they're going back through polytheistic societies, shamanic societies, and they're realizing there's something there that we can use if we can get in them. And the Fordham Conference took this stuff extremely seriously. While they send these people, while they laugh at you to your face, if you said to them, how do you feel about telekinesis? Stupid, don't we? Woo, stupid. They were archiving vast volumes of data from Russian universities on it. And where did they put them? In the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., right next to what? The Third Reich's supernatural and mystical occult library. They're very, very and they have you believing, oh, it's devil stuff. Oh, I'm a Christian. Devil. I'll see the devil. I got news for you. That's how they're getting you. They're making you afraid of it, rather than you having an intelligent, human, mature interest in it. They're making you terrified of it. Doesn't mean you have to wear a goat's head mask and dance under the moon at midnight. But understand why those things took off, why they were the religion of so much of the world until very, very recently. Why at the time there was no war. Because they used to address, those spiritual traditions address the subconscious issues. That's what shamanism is about, going into altered states, finding a problem and dealing with it in this reality. It works. And that's all Jungian psychology really is. That's all he was doing. He was a new shaman, a modern shaman. Now, it always bubbles up from the bottom. Like a family, if a family has a huge problem that they don't talk about, it's usually the little children who will mention it. Why did Granddad leave Granny? That kind of thing. They're out of the mouth of babes. It's the base of the family. It's the purest, comes up. If there's a house is collapsing, it's always going to happen in the foundations, because you can knock the roof off, but you take the foundation, that's all gone. It comes from below. It comes from up, and it manifests in the front. If the soil is bad, the tree is bad. The harvest is bad. The soil is good. Now you think of your psyche in exactly the same way. Now no tree can ever grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And I went to hell that day. But it made me a better person, as painful as it was. It made me understand things better. Maybe some of these nuns were victims. Maybe their parents dumped them in when they got pregnant. And maybe they were so brainwashed. Maybe they were beaten. There was probably evil ones. But it made me a better person, because this was not a human. This is not natural. Humans don't do this. This is not us. We're not. They love to tell us that original sin thing. Oh, we're all sinners. I'm not sin. I wasn't born original sin. And that has justified that. These are the babies of illegitimate children. They're nothing, right? Especially if they don't have an economic value, and then they're something. And so if you don't address the problems below, you're not healthy above. And this is your psyche, and this is everything. And an enormous, enormous part of that is going and recognizing your shadow, or the shadow side, the dark side. All this new age stuff of like love and light and all this stuff, all those people end up crazy. They all go bonkers. They all end up becoming, a lot of them become very nasty, because the subconscious is saying to them, it's not all love and life. There's people out there that are going to rob you, rape you, damage you. There's a dark world, there's dangers out there. It's just like in the old forest, they would have said, you can't walk around going, oh, it's all, look, there's tigers, there's snakes. You know, you're being told. And that's what they often have, like people who are very, very love and light often have problems. It will happen eventually. Even if their hearts are in the right place, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable because it's an imbalance. In an electronic circuit, you must have the positive and the negative flow of electrons. You just put a positive flow in and you have no negative return. The electrons don't move. They don't move, you get a surge and you burn the components out. Nothing happens. You have to have a flow. And the dark side is what creates the flow. The dark side is what creates the circuit. It continually processes. It creates a feedback loop. You learn things. If this something's not, and so people will go, Carl Jung said this, to enormous, enormous lengths to not confront their dark side. And everyone has a dark side. Now, dark side doesn't mean evil. A dark side could be an addiction, alcoholism, or say if your partner was an alcoholic and you're holding it inside, and you really should be saying to them, you've got a problem. It's not working. That's the shadow. That's the shadow not being dealt with because there's darkness there. There's these children. This is all these special snowflakes. Do you hear about them? They're all like a pampered generation. That's because they all got a prize. They all got first prize. You know how dangerous that is for your psyche? Because it's not winning first prize is what makes you better. Or it makes you realize I can't, like I was no good at football when I was a kid, so I turned my attention to something else. I got into cycling. I got into hiking in the mountains, which I still do. And that's how you do it. There's we don't do that anymore. We live in a 24-hour flashy, technicolor world of entertainment. And even when violence is portrayed on TV, there's no real consequences. A guy batters his wife up on EastEnders, and now the ads, or now the comedy, the game show. You understand? There's no reflection of what that really means. So it cheapens the human experience. It cheapens I was talking to a guy who used to work on EastEnders. You know what he told me the #1 rule on EastEnders for cameramen? Don't ever show the sky. Always keep the camera below the level of the buildings in Albert Square, because you're in a prison. You're in a prison. The corralling of consciousness. And that was they've been pushing us into boxes forever. And now we're in this is why they'll never give us the microchip, because we have it already. We have it all. This thing knows where I am, who I'm with, who I'm close to, what I'm doing, what I'm interested in. So what's the point of sticking a chip in me when you've already got it? And that's also an occultic thing as well, because the devil doesn't barge in your front door. The devil is invited, like Dracula. And so this inability to deal with the shadow side of yourselves, it creates a resistance, a fear-based mentality. It creates a fear-based mentality, and that's why they don't want you dealing with your shadow side. They don't want you dealing with, like, I know, I grew up in Dublin, and I know many of you grew up in cities around the UK, but if you got carried away with yourself, someone turned around and said, yeah, you did a good job on that for an idiot. And that, at the time, was building character. You don't say it to little children, of course, your own kids, but your mates at work, that kind of thing. And they would say it to you. Oh, look, a state of him, Like, I can remember one time I was going to a dance when I was in school, and it was like, 1979, I was a teenager. I think I had a lime green suit and mother of pearl shoes, which wasn't that unusual. at the time. And I walked in, and my Uncle James was there, and he goes, "Jay, look at that fucking..." He's like, and he burst out laughing. He burst out laughing. And then that was great for me, because that made me realize right there and then that I wasn't meant to be normal. I was at my worst when I tried to fit into society, right? And then a year later, I had a mohawk, and I was just happy for the rest of my life. And that's the way I still am. It made me realize that uncomfortable feeling of that sensation of trying to be at the school dance, being like the rest of them, trying to dance with a girl. Why does this feel like shit? How come John Travolta doesn't? It's the two most longest walks you can take, the first longest walk you can take, right, is from your jail cell on death row to the hangman or the electric chair. You know what the number one walk is? In an Irish 1970s Catholic disco, walking across to ask a girl to dance. You want to talk about the dark night of the soul. You want to talk about a shamanic experience. By the time you get over there, if you haven't destroyed yourself, she will. But it builds character. It builds character. Because we're still subject to the forces of nature. We're still going to go. You tell people everything's lovely and everything's wonderful, and you get out to your first job, you can actually get post-traumatic stress disorder from someone saying, "You didn't do that report properly." This is a dangerous generation we're raising. And I'm not saying people should be nasty to their kids. That's not true at all. You build up their confidence. You tell them you're very good at this stuff, but you could be better. Or, you know, your guitar playing is good, but you're also very good at football. Give that a go. You know, you don't say you're crap, you know, like that, anything like that. This is a big problem. That's what was a dark. That's when it goes too dark. But it's always a balance. It's always a fine. It's always a thing of micromanaging your own consciousness, and then micromanaging your family, your friends, your social circle. This place here is very micromanaged. Micromanaging a group, micromanaging a community. Keeping that all going, then you have a solid foundation, right? You got your solid foundation, and then you can move up and look at the bigger picture. Because right now, we're not mobilized enough as an army to take on the world as it is right now. We're getting better. We're getting better. But you still confront people who don't. It's still hard to reach people. You can tell them, they know that the world is dysfunctional. They do know that, right? But if you actually name things, it frightens them. I don't want to talk about that. You understand? It's like they know the devil exists, but they don't want to see his name or see his picture. It's very common. That's also, they're not confronting the shadow. They're not confronting. And so this whole thing of you micromanage at home, not just charity, I'm talking about everything. You know, you cannot be worrying about housing policy in Botswana when people are on the streets in Milton Keynes. I'm sorry, that's not natural. It's not racist. It's not look after my own. You're denying, you're dehumanizing that person that's on the street in your town in order to feel altruistic. And that's the problem with Bill Gates. I don't think Bill Gates is a psychopath. I think he's a dangerous, altruistic idiot. He's a dangerous idiot. But I don't think he's evil. I don't see that at all. I see the same in Bono. If you met Bono, he's actually a very nice man. And he's a very decent guy. But when he has that camera in front of him, or when he's around those people, it's almost like he becomes possessed. And he turns into an egomaniac, has all the problems in the world. But if you look at his life, he's a very devoted husband and father. You know, and anyone that's ever, I know in Ireland, Dublin growing up, anyone that ever knew him said, yeah, he's got this ego thing, but he's a really, really nice fella. You know, like, no, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone say he's a bastard. No, he's anything like that. Geldof, on the other hand, forget it. But him, no, yeah. And Bono really does come from a poor background. His father was a postman, and his mother died when he was young, so he's had a hard life. He grew up in the same neighborhood I did. Geldof grew up in money and tells everybody he was on the streets working in factories. His family were a wealthy immigrant family who opened the chain of high-end chocolatiers all around Dublin. And he tells people that he was on the streets. He came from the streets. Total liar. Total liar. He grew up in a Regency house, like a mansion on the beach, and he went to Blackrock College, which is Eton of Ireland. And he sings songs about life on the factory floor. Don't ever trust anyone like that, ever. Give me the fucking money. And it makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it? Makes a lot of sense now. See, that made me a better person in those kinds of ways. Now, I don't like the people. If I don't like you, I'll ignore you. If I like you, I'll tell you, and if I love you, I'll shower you with love. But I won't lie to you ever, and I won't give you things that I don't fully know for a fact completely, okay? For completely, I don't know it. Examining Tuam from a distance has allowed me to look at other things, okay? Now, the Pizzagate thing, at first my initial reaction was, it's a distraction from something else. It's probably something to do with the political thing. But the more I've looked around that, and the more I spoke to people, and particularly through the arts field, and talking to people about the social circle, I think there's something to that. There's a lot of, this is just a tangent I'm going off on here a little bit, but there's something about outsider art and the legalization of pedophilia. They're going for the subconscious mind. Remember, the subconscious mind sees symbols. It reads in signs and symbols and metaphor. And they have these paintings of kids. You saw the paintings? I'm not going to say anyone's guilty or innocent. I believe in the law and the jurisprudence, and I don't like to cast names until things have been really proven, you know. And there's paintings, you've all seen the paintings connected to it, that art scene, that whole, what they call outsider art. Now, the father of outsider art is probably someone you've never heard of, called Henry Darger. Henry Darger was a janitor in Chicago in the 1930s, 20s and 30s. And he wrote the longest novel in the world. He was a recluse, and he painted hundreds of huge paintings of little naked girls with butterflies. And he invented an imaginary world called In the Realms of the Unreal. And there's a very good documentary on YouTube called In the Realms of the Unreal. Watch it. It doesn't criticize him, but you will watch that and you will read between the lines. He used to paint naked. He believed that there was a liberation of the world, was an army of naked girls, naked prepubescent girls, who would lead an army who would overthrow this corrupt force. And he wrote a novel that had something like 200,000 pages, almost something like maybe even 400,000 pages. Enormous canvases bigger than this room, and they're all hanging today in the Chicago Museum, of little naked girls being murdered and tortured. Now, he is considered the father of outside art. He was probably a pedophile sex killer too. In the film, they actually go through his diaries. He kept his diaries, he wrote his novel, and he painted his paintings. And there was a child went missing. I can't remember her name. It was a Polish surname, one of those long Polish surnames, a little girl. And in his diary, he was writing about that, I'll keep going to communion every day until she's found. I'll keep painting and I'll keep writing until God brings her into safety. She was found dead and she'd been sex killed, right? He is almost certainly the prime suspect. And also a lot of little girls went missing at the time when he was in Chicago at the time. Now, what happened to him? Well, he became the hero of American outsider art. And his canvases of these Vivindian girls, they're called, are all over these museums, and he's held up as a genius, a great art genius. And it's basically inside the mind of a pedophile. And it's truly another consciousness. But he's held up as the father of outside art. And all of these other weird artists that we see painting these canvases that we saw connected at the whole Pizzagate thing, they all venerate him as the kind of granddaddy. There is a trajectory going on here. That they didn't invent this guy, they found him and then they made him famous. And these are now replacing almost like religious murals. You understand? They're creating the new reality. And they parade school children by them. And they see a guy with a bayonet killing a little girl. You know, that kind of thing. There's all these kinds of things, images going on in them. And that became, it developed that kind of thing. So I'm, between that and seeing the language that was used, I'm not going to say anyone is guilty at Pizzagate, but I haven't got time for it. If you want any other researchers out there want to jump on this, please do, because I think there's a rich seam of some real dirt in that that can be really found. That they always give you the bones to throw you away. You know, they always say, oh, they were cooking the children over here. They give you sensational stuff because you don't look at the little stuff. You don't look at who these artists are connected to, who their heroes are, what kind of art they created, and why is this tied up with these people? Why this is tied up with these people? So I know this is, I have to finish soon. I know this has been a kind of a dark one for me, for you, but it's that messed me up. But I just want to say one final thing. Firstly, the earth is shaped like that, okay? See that? Right? That's a woman. That's an ovum, right? That's a big booty. It's a boob. That's a lady. That's a lady, right? That's your earth mother, Gaia, right? Okay? You take that out of that, you lose your soul connection to your mother, okay? I know I'm sounding very kind of spiritually here. Spiritual, motherfucker. But that's more than just the first words that human beings ever say. Is all the languages begins with the letter M, and ma is the same all over the world. Ma. A baby's all over the world called, in all languages, mother is rooted in the ma. From Welsh to Micronesian, from Slavic to Aztec. Ma, right? Mother, right? This is the mother, right? This is the mother, ma. And that's where, and that came from the measurement of the period, parameter, meter, and so on. The period. The moon, remember Pierce telling us? The moon going around. I wish I had more time to talk. But that, when you flatten that, you've killed your mother. You've lost your soul connection. Now, I don't say you shouldn't research these things, anything like that. But consider these things very carefully. Because one thing I've noticed about a lot of people that got into that scene, they became fanatical Christians. What did I say earlier on about soul loss? It's replaced by fundamentalism. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's that shape. And then finally, one last thing. Right? Say hello to Mama. One last thing. I had been researching for an upcoming book, the second part of Walpurgis Night and some films, and I hiked across the Odenwald forest in Germany, one of the last great forest wilderness of Germany. I hiked from Frankenstein's castle on my own at night to the city of Darmstadt, all across these mountains that had these amazing magnetic anomalies. It's the center, it's the nearest you could get to Europe at the time of, you know, the Druids, the ancient times, whatever. And I slept in the forest. I bought myself a big knife that length in the sports shop just in case, but I'm not stupid, dark, it's shadow side. And I had an amazing shift in consciousness. But I got lost. The GPS meters don't work, and neither does any compasses work because of all these magnetic anomalies. So I just walked. So I left Frankenstein's castle where a guy called Dipple was digging up bodies, right? And he was putting electrodes to them, trying to bring them back to life, trying to resurrect the dead. And they ended up in the city of Darmstadt. The city of Darmstadt is the biotech and genetic engineering center of Germany. And now I'm here. And then you tell me the collective unconscious doesn't exist. It comes up from the bottom. You must become like a piece of sand inside an oyster, right? What happens? It irritates the oyster. They're the oyster, you're the sand grain. And it starts coating it, and eventually you get a pearl, right? And then it has to eject the pearl. Well, you're already pearls. Now become a necklace. That just keep spreading it. Just keep talking about it, but don't be hysterical, and don't be distracted by the silliness of that stuff. And always research your facts before you talk to other people. And that's basically it. Thanks very much.